case of Kristen Rossum. She could have pursued a career in science, but she chose a different path. Blonde Kristen Rossum, a chemistry graduate from San Diego State University, had the potential for a brilliant future. Instead, she is serving a life sentence at the Central California Women's Facility for the crime she committed against her husband. Ralph and Constance Rossum had 3 children and were preparing them for an undoubtedly bright future. The children received education from top schools, were tutored, and participated in clubs and sections designed for talent development. However, the fragile and impulsive Kristen broke, unable to keep up with the pace and pursuit of perfection. Lying, skipping classes, and the desire to escape reality first introduced her to a sense of ease and oblivion through alcohol consumption. Soon, alcohol no longer provided the desired sense of tranquility, and she became dependent on the controlled substance methamphetamine. Methamphetamine, or meth, is the most addictive illicit drug in the United States. It induces paranoia, clouds judgment, produces euphoria, and can cause hallucinations. Kristen's erratic behavior and detachment from reality drew her parents' attention. After a long conversation, she admitted she had been addicted to the substance since high school. This behavior was a severe blow for a family of university-educated professionals. After several months of numerous conflicts with her parents, 17-year-old Kristen secretly ran away to Mexico with friends for a holiday. There, she met a man by chance. Tall and handsome, Gregory DeVilly, 7 years her senior, seemed like an angel who would save her, and he did. Greg fell in love with the troubled young woman. He assumed the role of a parent, taking responsibility for her well-being. With Greg's support, she secured a job at a local forensic department as a toxicology assistant. Her skills impressed her employer. Her addiction was overlooked, which worked in her favor, as her work in toxicology provided access to seized controlled substances. As a forensic assistant, she graduated from university with honors. Her teachers and employer praised her, awarding her the Best Student accolade, unaware of the reasons behind her passion for the profession. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Her relationship with Greg lasted about 5 years and culminated in a grand wedding on June 5, 1999. Kristen's parents adored Greg and were relieved for their daughter, as she had climbed out of dependency and confidently embarked on a promising and happy path. In March 2000, Kristen was hired by the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office as a toxicologist, a professional who analyzes body fluids to detect controlled substances. Gregory was working in the biotechnology industry at the time. Kristen quickly grew bored with her monotonous life and began seeking excitement elsewhere. She found an opportunity with a new colleague, Michael Robertson, who had been appointed department head. He was married, but that did not prevent a sudden infatuation from developing between them. Their relationship could not remain secret for long. Greg discovered numerous letters exchanged between the secret lovers. The marital relationship deteriorated, though Gregory still hoped to save the marriage, aware of his wife's weaknesses and striving as hard as ever to help her. This time, Kristen refused to be saved. She demanded a divorce. On the morning of Monday, November 6, 2000, Kristen was preparing for work as usual. Greg was ill and stayed home. Kristen was deeply concerned for her husband. In the days following their separation talks, he had been lethargic and unusually calm. She notified his workplace of his illness and visited him during her lunch break. Greg was asleep. At 9:22 p.m. that same day, Kristen called emergency services to report that her husband, Greg, was not breathing. He had most likely committed suicide while home alone. The woman cried into the phone and ignored the dispatcher's instructions to examine the body and possibly administer first aid. Police officers and paramedics arrived on the scene at 10:19 p.m. and pronounced Gregory DeVilliers dead. He was lying on the bedroom floor with his torso exposed, surrounded by scattered rose petals. Examination of the room suggested that Greg had most likely ingested a lethal dose of several controlled substances. Empty vials of powerful painkillers were strewn around, and torn wedding photos were found on his bed. During interrogation, Kristen stated that she had informed her husband of their separation the previous evening. Just 17 months after the wedding, she regretted marrying him. She felt she had rushed into the marriage, found him too clingy, and wanted to distance herself. Greg's death was initially ruled a suicide. The cause of death was determined to be strong sedative drugs. Kristen signed the cremation papers. However, Gregory's family and friends refused to accept such a sudden suicide. None had noticed any changes in his character or behavior. He had not shared his marital problems with anyone. Greg was known to be strongly opposed to controlled substances and would never have taken them willingly. Soon, the relatives managed to halt the cremation and demanded an independent autopsy. Their persistence allowed investigators to consider a possible homicide scenario. Toxicological tests soon revealed that Gregory's body contained an extremely high amount of fentanyl, a pain reliever 150 times stronger than morphine, along with lesser amounts of clonazepam and trace amounts of oxycodone, also known as hillbilly heroin. Investigators speculated that, under the strong influence of clonazepam and other drugs, someone else had administered the lethal dose of fentanyl to Gregory. Kristen became the prime suspect, as fentanyl is not available over the counter, and she had both the knowledge and access to such drugs. Upon her arrival for interrogation at the police station, Kristen's emaciated, unkempt appearance and her behavior indicated her drug dependency. This dependency was confirmed by her own statements on the day of Gregory's death. Kristen's accounts were inconsistent. Initially, she told paramedics that Gregory had not taken any medication, but later suggested he might have taken oxycodone. At the hospital, she told a nurse that Gregory might have overdosed on oxycodone. Oxycodone, similar in effect to codeine-based drugs, not only relieves pain but can induce euphoria. It depresses the respiratory center and can be fatal without timely intervention. Police considered the possibility that Gregory died from an accidental overdose of cold medicine and oxycodone. In conversations with Kristen, they also learned that Gregory had been very upset about their failing marriage, which led Kristen to tell police that he ended his own life. This was another avenue investigators explored. On November 8th, a colleague of Kristen's, Russ Lowe, called the police and informed them of her affair with her boss. This information shifted the course of the investigation. Evidence of Kristen's connection with her boss, Dr. Robertson, was discovered. The evidence included passionate emails, computer files, and professional articles revealing Dr. Robertson's specialized knowledge of fentanyl. The criminal puzzle was beginning to take shape. It was suspected that Gregory had become a threat to the lovers, as he knew that Kristen, with access to the lab and controlled substances, was secretly using them, and Michael was covering for her. It was a premeditated crime. During interrogation, Michael Robertson admitted to detectives that he was aware of his lover's drug dependency. At that time, no charges were filed against the couple. Both were dismissed from their jobs for violating multiple rules during the investigation. Serious trouble for Kristen began in January when police raided her home and discovered traces of drugs and paraphernalia. She was arrested for the first time, but was later released on bail. The investigation progressed as new information emerged, including Kristen's diary. During its initial examination, investigators hypothesized that it had been written not for herself, but for an external reader, as a means of covering up and affirming her innocence while crafting the appearance of Gregory's perfectly self-inflicted demise. On the day of her husband's death, she bought a rose while wearing revealing lingerie, actions inconsistent with her purportedly distressed demeanor. Medical examination indicated that Gregory had been unconscious for at least 6 hours before his death, and that his passing could have occurred an hour to an hour and a half prior to confirmation. Additionally, a bruise around a needle injection site on his arm was found, with its purpose and executor unexplained. At Kristen's workplace, a shortage of the drug that caused Gregory's death, along with other controlled substances, was discovered. Police believed Kristen had poisoned Gregory, administering fentanyl without his knowledge. The prosecution built its case on toxicological and medical data. With sufficient circumstantial evidence, Kristen was arrested on June 25, 2001, and charged with first-degree murder. After spending 6 months in custody, she was released on bail, and the first trial soon commenced. The prosecution's main theory focused on motive. They argued that she killed Gregory because he threatened to tarnish her good girl reputation by revealing her renewed drug use and affair with Michael Robertson. The prosecution claimed Kristen poisoned Gregory with fentanyl, a powerful synthetic opioid 80 times stronger than morphine. It was suggested that she first attempted to end his life with clonazepam, but when that failed, she administered fentanyl. They further argued that she staged the bedroom to make it appear as though Gregory had taken his own life, tearing pages from her diary and placing rose petals and a wedding photo around his body. The court heard that Kristen, with her degree in biochemistry, used her knowledge of drugs and chemistry to kill Gregory. The prosecution also claimed that Kristen intended to convince her colleagues in the medical examiner's office that Gregory's death was self-inflicted, concealing the presence of fentanyl. However, before Gregory's autopsy could be conducted, she was transferred to another lab, and her attempt to substitute toxicological research was unsuccessful. The prosecution presented Kristen's activities on November 6th. Early in the morning, she called Gregory's employer to report his absence, then went to work. Her colleagues testified that about an hour after her arrival, around 9 a.m., she was seen crying in Michael Robertson's office. The apartment building manager where Kristen and Gregory lived reported seeing her return home at 12:10 p.m. At 12:41 p.m., Kristen went to a local grocery store and purchased several items, including a single red rose. Credit card statements confirmed this purchase. Hours before Gregory's death, she made multiple calls to Michael Robertson. Dr. Brian Blackburn, the San Diego County medical examiner who conducted Gregory's autopsy, testified that Gregory had been deceased for at least an hour before paramedics arrived. He informed the court that Gregory had developed early bronchopneumonia, a condition in which secretions, normally expelled through breathing, accumulate in the lungs because a person is either unconscious or not breathing deeply enough. Dr. Blackburn also stated that Gregory's bladder contained a significant amount of urine, which would have been very uncomfortable had he been conscious. This led Dr. Blackburn to conclude that Gregory had been breathing poorly for approximately 6 to 12 hours before his death. A person in an unconscious state would not have been able to sprinkle rose petals over themselves. Dr. Blackburn further testified that the level of clonazepam in Gregory's blood was not at an overdose level and was not lethal. Dr. Theodore Stanley testified on behalf of the prosecution, explaining that fentanyl is a potent and fast-acting pain reliever with serious side effects that can lead to respiratory arrest. Dr. Stanley stated that the speed at which fentanyl acts depends on the method of administration. He detailed that peak effects occur about 16 hours after applying a transdermal patch, 20 to 30 minutes after oral ingestion, 15 to 20 minutes after intramuscular injection, and within 5 minutes after intravenous injection. Dr. Stanley explained that fentanyl is usually not administered orally because the liver destroys approximately 65% of it, leaving only 35% to enter the bloodstream. When asked how fentanyl entered Gregory's system, neither Dr. Blackburn nor Dr. Stanley could provide a definitive opinion. Dr. Stanley indicated that the various concentration levels in Gregory's body, along with evidence that he was unconscious and breathing shallowly for several hours, suggested that fentanyl was likely administered multiple times. The prosecution could not conclusively explain how Kristen poisoned Gregory, though there were indications she may have applied fentanyl patches to his arm while he was asleep. The disappearance of 15 patches from the laboratory where Kristen had worked supported this theory. The defense argued Kristen's innocence, acknowledging that fentanyl caused Gregory's death, but claiming he self-administered it, intentionally ending his life due to despair over family issues. Kristen testified in court, describing waking on the morning of November 6th to find Gregory distraught. She called his employer at 7:42 a.m. to report his illness and that he would not be coming to work. She said she went to work but returned to the apartment during her lunch break to check on him and have lunch. Kristen's testimony continued. She asked Gregory why he was so upset that morning. He replied he wasn't feeling well and had taken oxycodone and clonazepam, planning to stay home and rest. She left for work, returned around 2:30 p.m. for lunch, then went back to work and arrived home around 8 in the evening. Gregory was lying on the bed, and she thought he was asleep. She took a bath, and upon finishing, attempted to wake him, finding him cold. She called emergency services. During cross-examination, the prosecutor described her explanation as strange. Kristen admitted to lying in the past and about her drug use. He told the court that fentanyl was the perfect poison because it is difficult to detect, a fact she would have known from her job. Medical testimony derived from autopsy and toxicological results established that Gregory was unconscious for approximately 6 to 8 hours, indicating that Kristen could not have had lunch with her husband that day. The defense contended that although Dr. Blackburn demonstrated that the clonazepam level in Gregory's blood was not lethal, taking oxycodone, an opioid, together with clonazepam, a benzodiazepine, could produce a synergistic effect, increasing their potency. They proposed that Gregory might have ingested the drugs unknowingly himself. The method of fentanyl administration and the reason for the high levels detected in his system remained unexplained. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kristen guilty of first-degree homicide and special circumstances homicide due to the use of poison. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Kristen maintained her innocence and appealed the verdict. The appellate court was informed that errors were committed by her own defense team. Her attorneys acknowledged that fentanyl caused the death, but failed to test autopsy samples for fentanyl metabolites. This test could have clarified whether Gregory ingested fentanyl, or if the fentanyl present in the samples resulted from laboratory contamination after his death. Had fentanyl been detected solely in the samples and never in Gregory's body, the prosecution's claim that fentanyl caused his death would have been invalid. The appellate court was informed that there was a break in the chain of custody regarding the samples. The samples were placed in a cardboard box, with each container labeled as a sample from Gregory's body, but the containers were not sealed. They were intended to be delivered to the sheriff's office for immediate transfer to an external lab, but the recipient was absent, leaving the box at the medical examiner's office for approximately 36 hours before delivery to the sheriff's forensic laboratory. The appellate court argued that anyone with a key to the medical examiner's office had access to the samples. Fentanyl could have been introduced posthumously. Kristen asserted that there was a motive to tamper with the samples and frame her for the crime because of various personal relationships and tensions among staff. Kristen indeed argued before the appellate court that on November 8, 2000, Michael informed one of the toxicologists that he had examined a sample of Gregory's stomach contents. The 3-judge panel of the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals determined that Kristen's attorneys erred by not challenging the prosecution's assertion that her husband died from a fentanyl overdose. They stated that her legal team should have tested the autopsy samples for fentanyl metabolites instead of merely admitting that he died in that manner. However, they did not overturn the verdict, instead remanding the case to federal court to assess whether this defense error could have affected the trial's outcome. Following this ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court determined that federal courts must respect the state court's decision when evaluating such appeals. Based on this determination, the appellate court voted against conducting a hearing on Kristen's case. Her appeal was denied, and she remains in custody. Michael Robertson was implicated as an accomplice in Kristen's trial. Authorities quietly filed a criminal conspiracy complaint and issued a sealed arrest warrant for Michael Robertson, the former employer and lover of convicted perpetrator Kristen Rossum. Robertson, who has lived freely and worked as a forensic toxicology consultant in Australia since Rossum's husband's death in 2000, could be arrested and held on $100,000 bail if he ever returns to the United States. Gregory's family filed a lawsuit accusing the county of negligence that allowed Kristen to steal a lethal dose of drugs from the medical examiner's office without detection. In 2006, a U.S. court awarded them $147 million in civil damages. In a case that continues to capture national attention, Rossum, a former toxicologist at the county medical examiner's office, was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole in February 2003 for stealing drugs from the lab and using them to poison her husband, Gregory de Villiers, staging a suicide in their apartment and scattering his body with red rose petals. Moving on to the next case. Case of Melania Ray. This is the account of Melania Ray, a striking woman who was serving as a drill instructor in the Ken Regiment at the time of the incident. She was married to Salvatore Perella, and together they had a 1-year-old daughter named Vittoria. The family lived in a small village called Oscolaquina near the San Marco Plateau in Italy. At that time, tourists walking along the paths below the mountainside could not see the flowers that usually bloom on the plateau because the snow had only recently melted. However, a bar and several small shops were open, allowing visitors to walk around and take in the scenery. The tragedy occurred on Monday, April 18, 2011, at around 3 p.m. On that day, Salvatore arrived in the area with his young daughter after parking his car nearby. He entered a small bar, used the restroom, and then asked the locals if they had seen his wife, Melania. She had recently given birth and had gone missing. At the time, she was 28 years old, athletic, and had long dark hair. When Salvatore realized that no one had seen Melania, he grew increasingly anxious, pacing back and forth. He eventually broke down in tears, expressing his fear that his wife had been kidnapped. The people present decided to help support him and his daughter by assisting in the search for Melania. They stepped out onto the porch and walked along the path from the parking area to the bar, hoping to find some sign of her, but they found nothing. Salvatore then explained that earlier that morning, he had been with his wife. After lunch, they went to the plateau, where he played with his daughter near the swings in the playground. His wife had intended to step away briefly to buy coffee and use the restroom, but she never returned. Feeling that something was wrong, he began calling her repeatedly over the next 15 minutes, but she did not answer. He noticed that her phone was missing and suspected that she might have been kidnapped by people in a passing car. Salvatore remained at the bar and spoke with the owner, Giovanna, but the longer he stayed, the more unusual his behavior appeared. First, Salvatore was not properly dressed for a cool spring day. Second, he seemed to ignore his 1-year-old daughter while he mourned his missing wife. The little girl wandered around the bar, became hungry, and felt cold, yet her father paid no attention to her needs, continuing to cry and retell his story about his wife's disappearance. At 4:34 p.m., a call was placed to the local police station by Giovanna, the bar owner. She contacted emergency services because Salvatore had just left, stating that he had been unable to find his wife for over an hour and feared that she might have been kidnapped. He had his young daughter, just over 1 year old, with him, and the father was clearly distressed. When he returned to the bar, Giovanna handed him the phone so he could speak directly with the police. The shaken man gave the dispatcher some information about himself and his missing wife, Melania. He mentioned that she had a hernia, which might have worsened because they were near the mountains. He repeated the same story he had told others, stressing that Melania had disappeared after going to the bar. Throughout the call, he spoke very quietly, often mumbling and stuttering, with long pauses in between. Police had to repeat nearly every question several times to get a response from him. When officers arrived, he repeated his account, explaining that Melania had health problems, which forced them to go to the nearest hospital. They later decided to stop for a walk and coffee. While she stepped away, Salvatore stayed at the playground with their daughter, who was playing on the swings. When Melania failed to return, he became worried and tried calling her, but she did not answer. This behavior was unusual, as she normally answered her phone calls. Worried by her silence, Salvatore eventually went to the bar where Melania was supposed to be and began asking patrons if they had seen her. As time passed without any news, Salvatore became increasingly desperate. The police asked him detailed questions about Melania's appearance and the moments leading up to her departure. Salvatore insisted that she was fine, that she had only needed to use the restroom, and that there was nothing unusual. At the scene, the police confirmed Salvatore's identity and began their investigation. They first conducted a quick analysis of his phone data, examining his recent interests and searches to assess his credibility. The police learned that Salvatore Piralisi was born on August 28, 1987, in the province of Naples, Italy. At the time Melania went missing, he was with their daughter in Faulina. His wife, Melania Ray, had been born on May 24, 1982, in another small town in the province of Naples. Since both were military personnel, the Carabinieri promptly contacted their military unit for additional information. To assist Salvatore, a friend of his who was also a police officer arrived at the scene, intending to help care for Vittoria. Eventually, the police gathered all necessary information and released Salvatore and his daughter. Melania's relatives were notified of the situation shortly thereafter. They rushed to the scene to learn more about what had occurred and to assist in the search for Melania. During discussions with police, Salvatore behaved unusually. As a military man, he knew it was crucial to provide accurate information to help find his wife quickly. Instead, he evaded questions and slowed the investigation. Police had to ask him for Melania's cell phone number 3 or 4 times before he finally provided it. The authorities wanted to track her mobile phone to locate her and trace her movements. There were only 3 busy walkways between the bar and the playground. One was over 100 meters long and mostly visible from kiosk cameras. The second was longer, leading to the War Memorial, a location frequently traversed by many people. The third walkway, 150 meters long, was also monitored by cameras. Surprisingly, however, nothing was captured. The cameras did not record any footage of Melania, raising doubts about whether she had been in the area that day. Data indicated that Melania's cell phone was last active at 2:45 p.m., just before she went missing. The activity occurred near the location where she had been staying with Salvatore and Vittoria. Unfortunately, this information did not provide any further leads. The only hope for the search rested with the National Mountain Rescue Service. Experts were called in, bringing specialized equipment and sniffer dogs. The dog's sense of smell is so acute that they can follow a scent for up to 20 days after it has been left behind. The dog quickly oriented itself and followed the asphalt road to the monument. At that point, the trail appeared to end, suggesting that Melania may have gotten into a car and been driven away. However, Salvatore later stated that they had been in the area just over a week prior. This left two possibilities. The dog was tracking Melania's old scent, or she had actually been abducted. Subsequently, the police took Salvatore to the station for questioning. There, he recounted all the details of the day leading up to Melania's disappearance. According to him, she had visited a physiotherapist around 11:30 a.m. They then went to a supermarket and later to the San Marco clinic, where doctors diagnosed her with an inguinal hernia. After lunch, they returned home to change their clothes before going for a walk with their daughter. Salvatore observed that they had been in the area for the past month, which had made Melania very familiar with the surroundings. Salvatore stated that he and Melania had gone to a bar together during their visit. After collecting all the necessary information, the police sent Salvatore back home. The main theory of the police was kidnapping, based on information obtained with the assistance of sniffer dogs. They believed that Melania had approached the road, was abducted, and her trail abruptly ended. All the evidence indicated that she may have been forced into a car. In May, Salvatore appeared on television to share his story, revealing new details. He stated that he and his wife had a small picnic near the war memorial and were relaxing there on the day she went missing. Salvatore also described the clothes and accessories Melania was wearing when she disappeared. Notably, he mentioned that she did not have her handbag containing her personal belongings at that time. She was dressed in casual clothes and several gold ornaments. However, it was puzzling how a responsible woman could set out on a long trip with a child without any preparation or a handbag. She did not even have money or cigarettes, which she usually smoked. Melania also forgot to bring a milk bottle and clothes for her daughter. Another confusing point was how she could have gone to the bar to buy coffee for her husband if she had no money. Salvatore's statements became increasingly contradictory, leading to suspicions that he might be lying. With these concerns in mind, the police decided to question Salvatore again to learn more. Salvatore claimed that they had a strong relationship and that they sometimes disagreed on various matters. But these disagreements never escalated into conflicts. In general, they had a great, strong family, which was confirmed by relatives and friends. Therefore, Salvatore was released. The following day, Melania's relatives arrived in town and stayed at a small apartment near the Salvatore home. Although exhausted from the trip, they prioritized visiting the police station to inquire about the investigation. They provided any information that could assist in locating Melania as quickly as possible. It was discovered that Melania had two phones that Salvatore had not mentioned. One phone was used to contact her husband and friends. The other phone was used to communicate with her mother and close relatives. At 1:34 p.m. on the day Melania went missing, her mother-in-law called the second number. They spoke for approximately 9 minutes, during which Melania shared details about the day. She mentioned that her family planned to go to San Marco for a walk and attend the christening of a friend's child around 4 p.m. The call ended at 1:43 p.m., and no further communication occurred. The police obtained no new information from Salvatore. His testimony largely repeated what they already knew. The police were puzzled by his choice to stay with the child. They questioned why Melania did not take Vittoria with her when she went out for coffee. The trip from their house to the park took less than 20 minutes. Did Melania truly need to use the bathroom during that time? And most importantly, where did she go afterward? Melania's relatives moved into the Salvatore home and spoke with him regularly about the situation, but he remained quiet and sorrowful, often avoiding their questions. Salvatore's relatives tried to support him as much as possible, helping care for Vittoria. On April 19, 2011, the entire city learned of Melania's disappearance. This was shocking, as the suburb was known to be one of the quietest and most peaceful areas in the region. Although the police suspected Salvatore, He had no prior legal issues. Salvatore frequently appeared on various television programs discussing the tragedy he was enduring. To clarify what had happened that morning, the police examined Salvatore's cell phone. They discovered that it had been on from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., but then remained off until 6 p.m. That same day, Salvatore drove to Plateau San Mar, where the armed forces, police, and search teams were operating. However, he showed little interest in the search efforts or their progress. Instead, he returned the sweatshirt he had borrowed from Giovanna, a bar owner, on the day Melania disappeared and quickly left, claiming he had to go to work. His behavior aroused suspicion among the police. While examining Salvatore's mobile phone, the Carabinieri found something significant. He had been in constant communication with a girl named Ludovica for the past month, exchanging thousands of messages and making calls almost daily. It became evident that he was involved in a romantic affair with her. Salvatore had fallen in love with Ludovica Pero in September 2009, and their relationship continued even at home in 2011 after Melania disappeared. In the summer of 2009, Melania discovered his infidelity and was furious. At that time, she moved in with her parents while pregnant with their daughter. Despite this, Salvatore continued to pursue Ludovica, who was 27 at the time and working in their military unit. Eventually, for the sake of their child, Salvatore and Melania reconciled, and she returned home. However, his affair persisted. He often rented an apartment to meet Ludovica. After completing her training, Ludovica was sent to Rome, but their relationship continued. Salvatore spent most of his free time talking to her on the phone. Their conversations revealed that Ludovica wanted more than a long-distance relationship, but Melania's presence prevented this. In the months preceding Melania's disappearance, tension had risen between Ludovica and Salvatore. Ludovica wanted him to be with her, while he kept postponing their time together. Melania was determined to maintain their marriage, especially after discovering that her husband was still seeing Ludovica. She even threatened to reveal his affair, which could have endangered Salvatore's job. This threat frightened him, causing him to distance himself from Ludovica. Melania believed her tactics had succeeded, thinking their relationship had returned to normal and that Salvatore's feelings for Ludovica were merely a fleeting passion. Melania was determined not to yield. She wanted to continue their marriage, while Ludovica urged him to abandon his family for her. Salvatore found himself caught between two women. The situation escalated to the point where, on April 19th, Salvatore traveled to Rome to meet Ludovica's parents, hoping they could begin a life together. The problem was that Melania was completely unaware of this plan. At the same time, he was supposed to be spending the holidays with his family, including Melania and their daughter. Just one day before this meeting, however, his wife went missing. This turn of events appeared very suspicious, as love triangles rarely have happy endings. When Salvatore returned to work after his wife's disappearance, management suggested organizing a rescue operation. They proposed assembling a team of soldiers and using specialized equipment. However, Salvatore remained remarkably calm and insisted that such an operation was unnecessary. He believed that his wife had left him out of resentment, so no operations needed to be organized. Salvatore then deleted his social media accounts, which he had used to communicate with Ludovica. This led the police to discover a potential motive for the crime. By now, the crucial time to find the missing person alive had passed. The police took the situation seriously and concluded that they had no chance of finding Melania alive. The search dog used in the investigation did not detect new traces or scent of Melania. On April 23rd, police received a call from an unknown man who identified himself as a mushroom picker. He reported seeing the body of a woman 17 kilometers from Felina. Police arrived at the scene shortly after. The body was found to be Melania's. Forensic experts discovered multiple injuries on her body during the autopsy. These injuries were consistent with stab wounds caused by small knives, mainly to the head and neck. There were also injuries to her chest and some self-defense wounds. Although Melania was not raped, significant evidence was collected from the scene, including her cell phone, a bloody lighter, a water bottle, and traces of a small car. The most important piece of evidence was a grocery store receipt from the morning of April 18th. Additionally, insulin syringes were found nearby, suggesting that Melania may have been abusing drugs. However, a toxicology report confirmed that there were no traces of alcohol or illegal drugs in Melania's system. the police received information from Salvatore about an interesting coincidence. A few days before Melania went missing, she and her husband had an intimate encounter in the same area behind the kiosk where her body was later discovered. Somehow, this information reached Ludovica, who was furious, having been lied to. He had repeatedly assured Ludovica that he was no longer intimate with his wife. This revelation only added to the complexity surrounding their relationship. However, on the day of their encounter, it was snowing and very cold, making it unlikely that they would engage in intimate relations outdoors. Additionally, it was known that Melania was experiencing pain from an inguinal hernia at that time. Given these factors, the narrative of a passionate encounter at the kiosk doesn't seem reasonable. However, this is just an assumption that needs to be proven. The police conducted a thorough search of the surrounding area for any traces of blood. They discovered various pieces of evidence, including shoe prints. In order to gather more information about the suspect, it was important to determine who was in the area at the time of the victim's death. During that time, soldiers from Salvatore's and Melania's regiments were present. In fact, the soldiers inadvertently left behind some evidence, including a water bottle, a store receipt, and shoe prints. This complicating factor hindered the police investigation because much of this evidence was irrelevant to the case. Additionally, the soldiers reported that they had not seen anyone suspicious that day and confirmed that no body was present. The police decided to examine Ludovica more closely. They discovered that she had not left the barracks on April 18th to 19th, providing her with a solid alibi for the time of the crime. Ludovica also shared crucial information, stating that on April 17th, she had spoken with Salvatore about their relationship. During this conversation, Salvatore mentioned that his wife was cheating on him. It was revealed that Ludovica was not Salvatore's only affair. He had previous relationships with other soldiers and women. Although Ludovica was aware of this, she did not consider it significant. Ultimately, it was uncovered that Salvatore had been involved with several women simultaneously. Salvatore, aware that the police had obtained this information, feared it could be seen as a motive for Melania's murder. To gather evidence against Salvatore, the police installed a wiretap in his car and also monitored his telephone conversations. This yielded crucial information. Salvatore often talked to himself in the car about his wife's murder, raising suspicions of his involvement in Melania's death. Police obtained permission to search Salvatore's car with luminol, discovering traces of blood inside. Samples were sent to a laboratory, and subsequent testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Melania. Meanwhile, the prosecutor's office was developing its theory to understand the motive behind the crime. They believed that Melania was a controlling person who harbored deep resentment toward her husband for his numerous betrayals, yet she kept him around for the sake of their child. This constant pressure worsened their situation. He sought an escape by beginning a relationship with Ludovica, who also exerted pressure on him. In this relationship, he felt like a third wheel, leading him to consider eliminating his difficult wife. Forensic experts submitted their full report, confirming the findings of the medical examiner. They determined that Melania died between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. on April 18th from 35 stab wounds. It is likely that the attack occurred while she was urinating, as indicated by her squatting position and an empty bladder. The attacker probably approached her from behind and struck when she least expected it, leaving little chance for her to defend herself. The nature of the wounds indicated that the assault was particularly brutal, stemming from personal animosity. It was confirmed that Melania never reached the plateau on the day she died, based on geolocation data from her mobile phone. The prosecutor's office believed they had stopped near the kiosks in the pine forest, where they allegedly engaged in sexual intercourse. This occurred around 2:30 p.m., and it was at this point that Salvatore unexpectedly attacked and killed Melania. Afterwards, he returned home, changed his clothes, took their young daughter, and went directly to San Marco, where he entered a bar and pretended to be a heartbroken husband whose wife had left him. Despite his claims of innocence, the jury found the evidence against him compelling. As a result, Salvatore Paralesi was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. He was also ordered to pay €2 million to Melania's family. Salvatore maintains his innocence and is currently serving his sentence in a reformatory in Milan. Custody of Melania's daughter was granted to her family. Now 13, Vittoria has expressed her desire to change her last name to her mother's. She does not visit her father and prefers that he remain unaware of her choices. Moving on to the next case. The case of Menci. In 2012, Menci, a citizen of China, enrolled at the University of Missouri in Columbia, USA, where she completed a master's degree in mechanical and aerospace engineering. One of her professors was impressed with her skills and offered her a position at a biomaterials company. While employed there, Menci met her future husband, Joe Elledge, in September 2015, while he was pursuing his engineering studies. They both worked at the same company, where Menci was Joe's supervisor. Their feelings for one another developed rapidly, and just 1 year and 7 months after their initial meeting, Joe proposed to Menci on September 22, 2017, on a trail at Rockbridge Memorial State Park, known as the Devil's Refrigerator. They married only 2 weeks later. Menci's parents believed they rushed into marriage because Menci's visa was close to expiring. They felt that American citizens could not fully understand the hardships immigrants experience. Although Menci was financially independent, she still struggled to obtain citizenship. After nearly 5 months, Menci received a promotion at work. Shortly afterward, she discovered that she was pregnant. Menci and Joe decided that she should turn down the promotion and leave her job to focus completely on motherhood, even though she was the primary earner for their family at that time. Their income dropped significantly, but it was still enough to meet their basic needs. In October 2018, Joe and Menci's family welcomed the birth of their first daughter. However, after her birth, Menci and Joe began experiencing difficulties. Although their marriage seemed normal to outsiders, only Menci's parents knew the truth. After leaving her job, Menci felt entirely isolated. She did not communicate with anyone. Her young child became her only companion, along with daily phone calls from her mother. Traditionally, Menci's parents traveled from China to the United States before she gave birth. To help care for and support her, they lived in a separate nearby house and visited Menci every day, but their presence increased tension between Menci and her husband, Joe. On October 9, 2019, 1 year after Menci's daughter was born, Menci's parents became concerned when they did not receive a call from her. Unable to contact her, they sent a family friend who lived nearby to check on Menci. When the friend arrived, Joe answered the door and stated that Menci was missing. He provided a disturbing explanation. On the evening of October 8th, he said he tried to give Menci a massage and flirt with her, but she refused, saying she needed sleep because she had important plans the next day. Joe claimed that he woke up the following morning to find Menci gone. She had left behind her car keys, cell phone, wallet, and most importantly, had not taken their daughter with her. Despite her disappearance, Joe did not report her missing right away, believing she had simply gone for a walk and would come back. A family friend tried to call Menci, but was unable to reach her. Eventually, under pressure, Joe reported her disappearance to the police, but instead of calling 911, he contacted the non-emergency number, 311. Menci's parents did not know this and believed the police were actively searching for their daughter. On October 15, 2019, 1 week after Menci disappeared, her husband, Joe Elledge, reported her missing to the Columbia, Missouri Police Department. He told detectives the same details he had previously shared with a family friend. Joe described Menci as appearing stressed on the night before she vanished. He stated that she went to bed after telling him she had important matters to attend to the next morning. When he asked her 3 times who she was meeting, she did not give clear answers. He suspected she might be having an affair and secretly meeting another man. Later that day, Joe informed investigators that he had found notes on Menci's computer discussing an affair. Joe said Menci texted a man from China, with the message ending in her expressing sadness that her husband was not interested in her. Joe speculated that Menci might have left him for this man, potentially abandoning their daughter for a new life. He expressed his love for their daughter and his wish for Menci to return home safely. From the beginning, investigators were skeptical of Joe's account and considered him a suspect. Joe's family hired a lawyer who revealed that Menci and the man in China had intimate and emotional conversations via text messages. The central question was whether Menci went to see the man who lives in China and where she was currently. The police discovered that Joe, upon realizing his wife was missing, did not call 911, but instead contacted 311, which made them even more suspicious of him. He voluntarily returned to the Columbia Police Department for further questioning. Investigators grew increasingly doubtful of his story, particularly when Joe mentioned taking long drives to find new walking spots instead of searching for his missing wife. Additionally, it was noted that Joe had closed the door before leaving their apartment. It appeared Joe did not care how Mengqi returned home, especially since her phone and keys were left behind. Mengqi had not driven the car. Detectives had suspicions, but they found no evidence linking Joe to his wife's disappearance. No blood, weapons, witnesses, or body. Furthermore, there was no indication that Mengqi had run away to meet another man in China. They also confirmed that Mengqi had not booked any flights. From the start, it was clear that Mengqi would never have abandoned her beloved daughter. Mengqi's parents refused to accept this theory and insisted she was a devoted mother. When detectives spoke with Zhou, they requested his phone number, which he willingly provided. Inside his phone, investigators discovered something alarming: over 10 hours of secretly recorded conversations with his wife, in which Zhou expressed his dissatisfaction with their marriage and his desire for a divorce. He also discussed plans to send his wife back to China. However, this finding was minor compared to the nearly 4.5 hours of recordings found on Mengqi's phone. In these conversations, the true nature of Zhou emerged. He threatened his wife, referred to himself as God, and demanded that her parents stay away from their home. It was chilling. The Zhou family's issues had begun a few weeks before Mengqi gave birth. Her parents traveled from China to support their daughter, following a tradition where grandparents help care for the baby for 100 days. This custom angered Zhou greatly, as he harbored a strong dislike for Mengqi's parents. What infuriated Zhou most was that Mengqi tried to resist him and insisted that she needed her parents. She loved them deeply and required their assistance in caring for the newborn. When Mengqi had just given birth, the relationship between her and her husband became extremely tense, and they argued frequently. Mengqi's mother mentioned that Zhou disliked it when Mengqi spoke Chinese around him because he barely understood the language. Zhou interpreted everything they said as offensive and negative toward him. Eventually, when Mengqi's father could no longer endure the situation and returned to China, Zhou felt relieved, viewing it as his personal triumph. At that point, he only had to manage his mother-in-law and reassert his authority in the household. Mengqi's mother made Chinese dumplings for Zhou's birthday, but he disapproved of the way she used the cutting board. This sparked a heated argument between Zhou and her. Zhou angrily demanded that she leave his house permanently. Mengqi's mother, who valued harmony because of her Confucian beliefs, chose not to confront Zhou and did not defend herself against his harsh words. Mengqi pleaded with Zhou to allow her mother to stay, explaining that she needed her mother's support, but Zhou responded only with insults and foul language. He told Mengqi she was incompetent solely because she was a woman. Zhou attempted to manipulate and control her. He even threatened Mengqi's mother, claiming he would harm her. This left Mengqi's mother in shock. She could not understand why Zhou was so angry with both her and Mengqi. Feeling helpless, Mengqi sought assistance from Zhou's mother, who quickly lost her temper and drove 2 hours to address the family conflict. However, even with his mother present, Zhou could not conceal his disdain for his mother-in-law. He demanded that she kneel and bow to him. Although Zhou eventually apologized, he still insisted that she leave before the 100-day mark. Consequently, Mengqi's mother returned to China. In October 2019, Mengqi disappeared. Detectives believed that serious family conflicts made her feel trapped, especially regarding her immigration status. Just 5 months earlier, she had attended another interview to apply for citizenship. 2 weeks after Mengqi's disappearance, the Columbia Police Department launched a criminal investigation into the case. On the same day, 16 days after she went missing, police arrested Zhou Elledge on suspicion of child abuse. Zhou admitted to physically disciplining his 1-year-old daughter. Before Mengqi disappeared, she had told her mother that she noticed bruises on her daughter and suspected Zhou was responsible. Her mother advised her to report Zhou to the police, but Mengqi never had the opportunity to do so. Zhou's lawyer argued that this was merely an attempt to have Zhou imprisoned. He claimed Zhou had made a mistake, emphasizing that he was a young single father who might have erred. Zhou was released on bail while his mother assisted him and cared for her granddaughter. Meanwhile, detectives continued gathering evidence against Zhou, convinced of his involvement in Mengqi's disappearance. On October 25, 2019, police obtained a search warrant and entered the apartment. Zhou had been missing for just over 2 weeks. During the search, They collected Minchie's backpack and notes that Joe had written to prepare himself for questions from reporters and investigators. Detectives conducted a thorough search of the apartment for any evidence and, following a hunch, also collected a pair of dirty boots for examination, but they found nothing significant. On the same day, Joe Elledge was arrested on suspicion of child abuse after fresh bruises were discovered on the girl's body. Meanwhile, the search for Minchie shifted to a search for her remains, as no one believed she was still alive. Detectives meticulously tracked all movements of Joe's car and phone. However, every lead they pursued ended in dead ends in this complex case. As a result, the detectives decided to charge Joe Elledge with first-degree murder, even without a body. These charges were filed while Joe was still in jail on child abuse allegations. Meanwhile, detectives continued their efforts to locate Minchie. Phone records showed that Joe had been away for 30 minutes on the day he reported her missing, a fact he did not disclose to investigators. When detectives searched that location, they found nothing. After months of searching, police were still unable to find Minchie. Her mother traveled to the United States to assist with the search, convinced that her daughter's body was nearby. Over the following months, police conducted regular searches in the area, and Minchie's mother held a memorial by the river. A year later, while Joe was still awaiting trial, a tourist walking in the park where Joe had proposed to Minchie noticed something shiny in the mud and discovered it was a wallet. Upon closer inspection, he saw a pair of shoes and then what appeared to be a human skull. He immediately contacted the police. Upon investigation, it was confirmed that the remains belonged to Minchie. Her parents learned that their daughter had died, but the circumstances surrounding her death remained unclear. Much time had passed, and even forensic experts could not determine the cause of death. They found unnatural damage to her bones, including 4 broken ribs, indicating she had suffered a strong blow to the back. Detectives began to formulate a theory about what happened to Minchie, focusing on the evidence collected after her disappearance. They noted that Joe's cell phone records placed him near the location where Minchie was found on the day she went missing. On the day of her disappearance, it had been raining. Key evidence included Joe's dirty boots. The dirt and gravel on the soles, along with foliage, were sent to the Missouri Botanical Garden for analysis. The lab carefully removed juniper tree needles from the boots for DNA testing. A lab worker then climbed nearby juniper trees, numbered each, and collected fresh needles from the highest branches. These samples were preserved and compared with the needles found on Joe's shoes, revealing a DNA match. On November 1, 2021, Joe Elledge's trial for the murder of his wife, Minchie, began. Compelling evidence placed Joe at the scene where Minchie's body was discovered on the day she went missing, including DNA from the trees and geolocation data. However, his lawyer presented a new narrative. The lawyer claimed that Joe did kill his wife, but insisted it was a tragic accident. Because of evidence from the juniper tree and its DNA, Joe could no longer maintain that Minchie had run away. He had to admit that he buried her in a shallow grave. Joe stated that he was aware of his wife's communication with a man from China and that they had an argument that night. Feeling upset and hurt, he wanted to take their daughter for a walk. Minchie rushed toward him, attempting to take the child, but Joe pushed her away. She fell against the table, injuring her ribs, and lost consciousness. When she regained consciousness, she went to bed. In the morning, when the child began crying, Minchie did not wake up. Joe then realized she had died in her sleep. He claimed that his wife had attacked him first, and that he was merely defending himself, asserting it was self-defense. However, this explanation appeared highly questionable. Joe was twice the size of his wife, making it improbable that she could have attacked him, and after sustaining such a severe injury, she would not have been able to get up and walk to the bed. The prosecutor argued that the evidence, particularly the 4 broken ribs, indicated that Joe's account was fabricated. This injury showed that she had suffered a brutal beating. The prosecutor alleged that it was a premeditated murder driven by months of escalating anger. Joe harbored hatred toward his wife. In court, the prosecutor presented secret audio recordings between the couple to reveal the true dynamics of their relationship. These recordings helped clarify the motive behind the crime. No evidence was ever found that Minchie had communicated with other men. On November 11, 2021, after nearly 7 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. They found Joe Elledge guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 28 years in prison. Minchie and Joe's daughter currently lives with Joe's mother, but Mengqi's parents are pursuing joint custody of their 4-year-old granddaughter. Zhou's lawyer argues that while the child will always maintain a relationship with her Chinese grandparents, she should remain in the care of Zhou's mother for her safety. Moving on to the next case. The case of Michelle Davis. Michelle Davis was born on December 15, 1966, and lived in Des Moines. In 2008, Michelle, 41 years old, resided in Des Moines and had 3 children. Those who knew her described Michelle as friendly, adventurous, and passionate about motorcycles. Employed as a secretary at a trucking company, she earned respect and authority in her workplace. Her divorce was nearly finalized, marking a significant change in her life. Michelle had moved into her own apartment and obtained a restraining order against her husband, Randy Davis. The months leading up to their divorce were tense for the family. On Thursday, September 11, 2008, Michelle was working at her job. Her colleagues noticed that following the divorce proceedings, she seemed unusually carefree, as if a long-standing burden had been lifted from her shoulders. She was in high spirits and left the office around 4:30 p.m. after completing her tasks. Shortly thereafter, the 911 dispatch center received calls from eyewitnesses reporting a car accident on Interstate 235. A Mercury Sable was flipped over with an unconscious woman, still wearing a seatbelt, in the driver's seat. Unfortunately, paramedics were unable to save her, and the woman was identified as Michelle Davis. Initially, police believed Michelle had lost control of the vehicle, resulting in the accident. However, by the following day, this theory was ruled out. Forensic examination revealed that Michelle's death was caused by a gunshot wound to the head, not by injuries sustained during the rollover. The extracted bullet was sent for further examination in hopes of identifying the perpetrator. Investigators assigned to the case faced an unusual and challenging situation. While awaiting the results of the ballistic examination, local authorities took precautions to ensure public safety. There was concern that Michelle might have been a random victim, raising the possibility that the perpetrator could target others. Additionally, a large number of cars travel on this interstate, putting numerous drivers at risk of being targeted by the shooter. Given the urgency of the situation, police increased patrols in the city. Once it was confirmed that Michelle's death was not accidental, detectives returned to the crime scene to collect evidence. Unfortunately, they did not find any leads, including the cartridge case or other evidence. The initial assumption that Michelle's death was a car accident had led traffic services to clear the site, likely destroying potential evidence. Nevertheless, detectives did not give up. They decided to review traffic camera recordings, which had helped solve numerous cases in the past. By analyzing the available footage, investigators looked for the camera closest to the crime scene. After reviewing footage for half an hour, they found the relevant clip. The video showed Michelle's car overturning, but the quality was poor due to choppy and intermittent images, making it difficult to determine what had occurred. Despite obtaining a few relevant images, investigators were unable to find conclusive evidence explaining the rollover. Investigators faced significant difficulty as they believed they held an important clue that could help solve the case, but it ultimately turned out to be a false lead. Police were left with no choice but to continue scrutinizing the remaining camera footage and search for other eyewitnesses. While a team of investigators carefully examined traffic camera recordings, the lead investigator on Michelle Davis's case visited her family to share some news. It had been initially assumed that Michelle's death was accidental. However, in reality, this was not the case. The revelation that Michelle was, in fact, the victim of a crime left her family stunned. This tragic news was particularly devastating for Michelle's father, Lee Costner, whose wife, Michelle's mother Patty, had passed away prior to their daughter. Lee Costner had previously endured the loss of a child once before. His first daughter, Cheryl Sue Costner, passed away in 1965 at only 1 year old. Now 43 years later, he faced the unbearable anguish of losing another child. Outliving one's own children is arguably the most unimaginable suffering a parent can endure. Michelle's family informed investigators that her life had experienced significant changes recently. They suspected that the only person who might have harmed Michelle was her husband, Randy Davis, due to their pending divorce and a restraining order filed against him. While examining Michelle's background, another detective spoke with her co-workers and discovered that she had developed a close relationship with a colleague named Matt Jorgensen. According to Michelle's friend, the feelings between them were mutual. However, because Michelle was in the process of divorcing Randy, they chose to keep their relationship private, known only to a few colleagues and close friends. Consequently, the police now had two potential suspects, Randy Davis and Matt Jorgensen. When investigators tried to contact Randy, they were unsuccessful, as all calls went directly to voicemail. In contrast, they managed to speak with Matt, who candidly discussed his relationship with Michelle and gave an account of his actions on the day of her death. Matt stated that they never had arguments or fights. He was visibly shaken by Michelle's death and fully cooperated with the investigators. After confirming his alibi, the police cleared him as a suspect. Ballistic examination results indicated that the crime had been committed with a .22 caliber rifle at close range. Since the incident occurred on the interstate, police believed the shooter was likely driving another vehicle next to Michelle's at the same time. A new lead emerged when the police received a call from Michelle's insurance company, stating that her brother Todd was filing a claim for the life insurance payout. This raised suspicions, as insurance-related murders are not uncommon. The detective decided to visit Todd to ask questions. During the questioning, Todd realized he was being treated as a suspect, so he explained his whereabouts on the day of Michelle's death. Todd disclosed that their family was struggling financially and could not afford a proper funeral for Michelle, prompting him to file the insurance claim to cover the costs. Further investigation into Todd's alibi confirmed that he was indeed in a different part of the city at the time of Michelle's death, eliminating him as the shooter. Todd provided the police with information pointing to another suspect, Michelle's stepson, Josh. At the time of the incident, Josh was an adult who had recently returned from serving in the Marines. As someone experienced with handling weapons, Josh became a person of interest in the investigation. The police began exploring possible motives that could have led Josh to commit this crime. In another development, a witness came forward with a crucial tip. A woman who was driving on Interstate 235 around the time of Michelle's accident reported seeing a red pickup truck, likely a Ford F-150, with a driver acting erratically. The driver, described as a white man wearing a baseball cap, was swerving from lane to lane as if chasing someone. Although the description was limited, investigators considered this new information significant and proceeded with further investigation. The investigation into Michelle's death led detectives to review traffic camera footage, focusing on the presence of a red pickup truck. A woman had alerted the police to a suspicious red truck, and indeed, the footage showed this vehicle following Michelle from her workplace. Although the footage quality was poor, preventing the identification of the driver and license plates, further examination of recordings from other cameras confirmed that the truck had been following Michelle along her route. This strongly indicated that the killer was likely targeting Michelle specifically. Detectives soon learned that Michelle's husband, Randy Davis, was the owner of a red pickup truck. They immediately went to his residence, but found him not at home. However, his son Josh, a Marine with professional knowledge of firearms, was present. Josh stated that Randy had spent the day of Michelle's death shopping with his sister, returned home, and spent the evening watching TV. He also revealed that Michelle's divorce from Randy had been complicated, particularly due to her demand for half the value of their house. Additionally, Josh mentioned that his father had returned home around 5:30 p.m. that evening. Josh's account of the incident did not appear credible, and the conversation with him suggested he had a possible motive for the crime. When his father and Michelle divorced, she would receive a portion of the estate, which displeased him. However, these were merely suspicions, and without concrete evidence, there was insufficient basis to warrant an arrest or charges. As Michelle's family arranged her funeral, the police continued seeking leads. They investigated shops and gas stations along the route between Michelle's workplace and the location of her death to obtain additional surveillance footage. Near Michelle's workplace, a store provided another critical piece of footage. The store's surveillance camera also captured part of the parking lot. On September 11, 2008, the day of Michelle's death, a red pickup truck was seen parked at the store's entrance around 4 p.m. The police identified the truck as Randy's vehicle, but since Josh also used it, they needed to determine who had been driving that day. The footage showed the driver exit the truck, enter the store, then temporarily disappear from view, later reappearing to make a purchase and leave. The poor video quality made it impossible to distinguish whether the driver was Randy or Josh. To clarify the timeline, Michelle left work at 4:30 p.m., but the police had examined events occurring before that. At 4 p.m., a series of incidents took place near the store where Michelle worked. The police reviewed the footage and saw the pickup truck repeatedly visit the store during the following 30 minutes. In each visit, the driver did not leave the vehicle, but instead turned around and drove away. The last time the truck was seen near the store coincided with Michelle leaving work. Despite the police's efforts to identify the driver, they were unsuccessful. The police then attempted to contact Randy again. This time, they succeeded, and Randy came to the station. Before the interview, the police clarified that Randy was not under arrest and explained his rights. During the questioning, the police asked Randy about his whereabouts on September 11th. Randy explained that he and Michelle were undergoing a divorce after 17 years of marriage. He also stated that he worked as a carpenter and had gone to work that day. When asked what time he arrived home from work, Randy hesitated, then said he got home at 3:45 p.m. However, this conflicted with the surveillance footage and Josh's testimony. According to Josh, his father returned home around 5:30 p.m., roughly 2 hours later than Randy claimed. Randy further stated that he did not leave his house after 3:45 p.m. and that he was alone until Josh arrived, at which point they cooked dinner together. This also contradicted Josh's statement, who claimed he was already home when his father returned. Randy and Josh's accounts contradicted each other. After questioning Randy, investigators realized that one of them was lying. To gauge Randy's reaction, they informed him that Michelle had actually died from a gunshot wound, not from injuries sustained in a car accident. This information had been kept confidential, known only to Michelle's family. However, Randy's response was highly suspicious. He barely reacted, feigning surprise and looking away. When asked about his last conversation with Michelle, Randy requested a lawyer, effectively ending the discussion. Although the investigation lacked key evidence, including the murder weapon, the police released Randy. For days following Michelle's death, her family and friends gathered for her funeral on September 15, 2008. Randy attended the ceremony, attempting to appear sorrowful and even shedding tears. Investigators worked diligently to locate the killer quickly. Unexpected assistance arrived when Josh, accompanied by his lawyer, came to the police station and expressed his desire to make a statement. According to Josh, on the day of the incident, he had returned home from his sister's house to find his father, Randy, in the driveway with their car. As Josh entered the house, he saw his father holding a gun, and Randy warned him to stay away, saying it would be better if he did not come inside at that moment. Josh claimed he immediately understood his father's intentions and tried to intervene, pleading with Randy not to do something he would later regret. Despite Josh's plea, Randy drove away in the car and returned later, parking in the garage. It was then that Randy confessed to Josh that he had shot Michelle. Randy had been struggling to cope with Michelle's decision to file for divorce and her plans to claim part of their property. On September 11, 2008, Randy had waited for Michelle to leave work, driving past her workplace multiple times to ensure he would not miss her. This explained his repeated appearances on the store's CCTV footage. Once Michelle left work, Randy followed her and eventually found the right opportunity to act. He rolled down the passenger side window and fired. The police arrested Randy based on Josh's testimony. Prior to the trial, Randy accepted a plea deal, admitting to depriving Michelle of her life in exchange for a reduced sentence. As a result, 53-year-old Randy Davis was sentenced to 50 years in prison in 2010. Moving on to the next case. Case of Michelle Hadley. Michelle Hadley was born on December 20, 1986, in Upland, California. She is the eldest daughter of a business-oriented family and was raised in a strict, conservative household. Michelle grew up with a younger sister and maintained a close relationship with her parents. During her school years, Michelle led a relatively typical life. Her friends describe her as polite and kind, with a straightforward nature, always expressing her thoughts openly. When disagreements arose, she sought to resolve them. Michelle was diligent from a young age, consistently completing her duties and responsibilities. During high school, she was in a long-term relationship with a boyfriend. The couple stayed together for many years and ultimately decided to marry in 2008. However, she soon realized that marriage did not bring the happiness she had anticipated. After 4 years, their relationship began to deteriorate, and they eventually chose to divorce. In 2013, Michelle's life took a positive turn when she met Ian Diaz, who was 9 years her senior. For Michelle, the relationship felt destined. Ian was a U.S. Marshal, and Michelle worked in marketing. At first, they appeared well-matched. They met through an online dating site, and after a whirlwind romance, they decided to move in together by the fall of 2014. Ian proposed to Michelle, and they began planning their wedding. Initially, their marriage seemed ideal, but Ian's true nature gradually started to reveal itself. At first, Michelle did not notice the changes in Ian's behavior and attributed his actions to his caring personality. Over time, however, Ian's demeanor deteriorated. He became self-destructive and emotionally abusive toward Michelle, leaving her shocked, devastated, and deeply confused. Michelle came from a conservative background, and Ian sometimes requested that she wear revealing clothing, which made her uncomfortable. Despite her reservations, Michelle complied, believing he was merely trying to add excitement to their relationship. However, Ian observed that she yielded easily and began making increasingly daring requests. Eventually, he asked Michelle to get her belly button pierced, a request she initially hesitated to accept but ultimately agreed to. Ian continued to push boundaries, and his requests became progressively stranger. He asked Michelle to quit her marketing job and work at Disneyland, a place he loved and where he had previously served as a deputy U.S. Marshal. Perhaps Ian wanted to keep closer surveillance of his wife, and working at a location where he still had connections suited him. Ian framed his suggestion as a matter of safety, but in reality, it was an effort to gain greater control over her life. At first, Michelle found the proposal odd, but out of love for her husband and a desire to please him, she agreed. Over time, however, Michelle grew uneasy about the arrangement. She began to feel as though she was becoming someone she no longer recognized. She confided in her husband about her discomfort, but instead of listening, he became angry and violent. Subsequently, Michelle and Ian decided to purchase a condominium together, hoping that owning a home would strengthen their relationship. This decision was made roughly 2 years after they first met. The couple began searching for a condo in 2015 and eventually selected one in downtown Anaheim, though it was slightly above their budget at $470,000. At the time of the purchase, Michelle had no idea that Ian had no intention of contributing to the mortgage payments. When the first installment was due, Ian claimed he was facing financial difficulties, but assured Michelle that he would pay the following month. She went ahead with the $144,000 down payment. She managed all the paperwork and finalized the purchase, believing that everything was in order. However, in hindsight, it was clear that their relationship was already deteriorating. The situation worsened after they bought the condo. Although the deed contained both of their names, it became evident that Ian wanted the condo for himself, while Michelle alone was shouldering the mortgage payments. One summer evening in 2015, Michelle and Ian got into a violent argument in the car. Ian physically assaulted Michelle, causing minor injuries. Afterwards, Michelle drafted a distressing email to her sister describing the events, but she never sent it. As summer came to an end, nearly 2 months after purchasing the condo, Michelle decided to leave Ian and move in with her parents. Despite no longer residing in the condo, Michelle remained responsible for the mortgage. This decision would later become a contentious point in their relationship. In fact, Ian continued to skip mortgage payments, enraging Michelle. Around this time, Michelle had left her high-paying job and was working at Disneyland, a position she disliked. Furthermore, her new job offered significantly lower pay than her previous position. In an attempt to address the mortgage issue amicably, Michelle reached out to Ian via email, phone calls, and text messages. However, he deliberately ignored her, escalating the conflict. The tension between them reached a breaking point, prompting Michelle to confront Ian in person. Ian's response was shocking. He had never intended to pay the mortgage, which infuriated Michelle. Facing a difficult situation, she decided to take action. She emailed Ian, warning him that his behavior would have serious consequences if it continued. However, this email only made Ian angrier, and he responded by filing a restraining order against Michelle. The police did not fully support Ian's request, determining that he shared some of the blame. When Michelle learned of Ian's attempt to obtain a restraining order, she countered by highlighting his failure to pay the mortgage on their jointly owned condo. To resolve the matter, they agreed to hire property lawyers and eventually reached a settlement. The court ruling ultimately favored Michelle, ordering Ian to pay the outstanding mortgage balance. If he failed to comply, he would face an additional penalty. Although the ruling was unfavorable for Ian, he had no choice but to follow the court's decision. The situation dragged on for a year, and by 2016, Michelle and Ian had officially separated. This marked a new beginning for Michelle, freeing her from a toxic relationship. In contrast, Ian remained bitter about the outcome, continuing to live in the condo and pay the mortgage. Ian's life had become increasingly complicated due to the condo situation, so he decided to use dating apps again in an attempt to move on. This is how he met Angela Connell, a woman he believed was perfect for him. Angela was born in 1985 in Phoenix, Arizona. She attended a Catholic high school and later graduated from Arizona State University in 2006. Ian and Angela met in January 2016, and they immediately felt a strong connection. Their relationship progressed rapidly. Ian proposed within a month, and Angela soon moved into his condo. It appeared as though they were meant to be together. By May 2016, Angela announced she was expecting twins, which brought Ian immense joy. However, their happiness was short-lived when Angela received a threatening anonymous email claiming she was not the right person for Ian. Angela was shocked by the message and initially suspected that it might have come from her ex-boyfriend, Jason Rayburn, with whom she had a tumultuous relationship prior to her involvement with Ian. However, something did not add up. Angela had cut off all contact with Jason after their breakup, so he had no knowledge of her new relationship with Ian. It was not until Ian brought up the topic of the condo, which had been purchased by his ex, Michelle, that Angela realized Michelle might be the one sending the messages. Over time, Angela received more emails from different accounts. The emails contained similar information, but were phrased differently. Curious, Angela responded to one of the messages, asking the sender to reveal their identity. To her surprise, the sender claimed to be Michelle Hadley. Angela demanded that Michelle cease contacting her, but the emails continued. The tone of the subsequent messages escalated, leaving Angela feeling threatened and fearful for her safety. Afterward, she decided not to take any chances and sought a restraining order against Michelle. The incident occurred on June 1, 2016. Angela told police that an email from Michelle had left her feeling fearful and anxious. She expressed concern about leaving her home due to the threatening nature of the emails, fearing she might be attacked or killed if she did so. In response to the seriousness of the situation, the court issued a restraining order against Michelle. A short time later, in June 2016, Michelle appeared to have moved past the difficulties of her previous relationship. One evening, after meeting a friend, she returned home to find a team of police officers waiting in her driveway. Michelle was taken aback but cooperated peacefully with the officers and was taken in for questioning regarding a restraining order violation. During the interrogation, Michelle denied knowing Angela or sending the threatening emails described by the officers. She claimed she was being framed, citing 2 alerts she had received a week earlier. The first alert was from Google, stating that her email account had been shut down. The second alert came from Microsoft, indicating that her primary email was being used as a recovery email for multiple unknown accounts. Michelle reported this suspicious activity to the Anaheim Police Department, suspecting that her ex-husband was impersonating her. However, her concerns were dismissed by police, who believed she was lying. As a result, a restraining order was issued against Michelle, though she was unaware that this was only the beginning of a far more complex situation. Things took a darker turn after Michelle was served with the order. The situation intensified when Angela began receiving emails responding to a Craigslist ad that she had never posted. The disturbing ads described sexual coercion fantasies and included intimate details about Angela's life. The emails contained her phone number, condo address, and even the breed of her dog. It was evident that someone had created an account in her name, but what was particularly alarming was the access to such precise information. Ian and Michelle were the only individuals who knew Angela's condo address. Angela suspected Michelle, but thought it was unlikely. Fear overwhelmed her to the point that she did not want to leave her house. The thought of someone knowing her address and monitoring her constantly made her extremely uneasy. Not knowing who was behind the harassment heightened her terror. On June 24, 2016, just days after the Craigslist ad was posted, Angela was attacked, putting her life in danger. Bruises covered her neck, her clothes were torn, and she sustained a severe head injury from being slammed against a wall. Despite her condition, Angela promptly called 911. When police arrived, they questioned her about the assault, and Angela identified Michelle as her attacker. This time, the police decided to take stronger action against Michelle. Authorities believed that a restraining order alone would not be sufficient to protect Angela, and they decided to arrest Michelle. While in jail, Michelle was able to contact her parents, who were conservative. Her parents were determined to handle the situation discreetly. They posted Michelle's bail of $10,000, made possible by their financial stability as successful business owners. After the incidents, Angela continued receiving harassing emails. Interestingly, the emails appeared to come from Michelle's personal email address. However, it remained unclear whether Michelle had actually sent them. On July 13th, Angela called 911 after seeing a strange man outside her condo. When police arrived, the man claimed he was responding to a Craigslist ad posted under Angela's name containing explicit content. Further investigation revealed that the ad was created from an account linked to Michelle. This raised questions about Michelle's possible involvement and whether she had provided false information to authorities. Conversely, it was possible that someone was using Michelle's name to mislead the police. On July 14th, Michelle was arrested again, with bail set at $1 million, an amount her parents could not afford. Michelle strongly denied sending the emails or creating the Craigslist ads. Her parents believed her, knowing she would not threaten anyone. Concerned about potential consequences, Michelle's parents hired a lawyer, fearing that the person behind the threats could continue to get their daughter arrested. While Michelle was jailed for the second time, the threats and emails aimed at Angela ceased. For 3 months, everything seemed calm for Angela. Meanwhile, Michelle's parents sought to identify who was impersonating their daughter. They collected her records, including school and hospital documents, to find weaknesses in the case. This investigation led to crucial evidence. Michelle had been in the hospital on the day the first emails were sent, making it impossible for her to have sent them. This news gave her parents renewed hope. They had been trying to trace the source of the emails, which used encrypted IP addresses. Michelle's father downloaded various software programs to help identify the senders. Then, in a surprising turn, her parents received unexpected news. Michelle's bail had been posted. The twist was that Ian, the same man who had mistreated Michelle, had provided the $1 million bail. This occurred on September 30th, 2016, when Ian presented the police with the money. Michelle and her family were stunned and could not understand why Ian would do this. Many questions remained about his motives. Was he attempting to make amends for his past behavior, or was there another reason? After Michelle's release on bail, she and her family sought answers. Ian revealed shocking information, claiming that Angela had framed Michelle for sending threatening emails. Allegedly, Angela used fake email accounts in Michelle's name to send the emails to herself. Angela also posted ads on Craigslist, making it appear that Michelle was responsible. The details in the ads could only have been known by Ian and Angela. Further investigation revealed that Angela's bruises from June 24, 2016, were self-inflicted. Ian discovered CCTV footage supporting this claim. He also uncovered a history of deception by Angela, noting that she had lied since the day they met, including a fabricated pregnancy. Ian uncovered evidence that Angela had purchased a fake sonogram of twins on Etsy for $7.50 and a positive pregnancy test kit to support her fabricated story. Angela's motivation to ruin Michelle's life originated from meeting Ian in 2015. Ian frequently discussed Michelle and an incident involving a condo, which piqued Angela's curiosity and prompted her to investigate Michelle's past. She discovered that Michelle came from a wealthy background, leading Angela to view her as an opportunity for personal gain. Ian, who had been married to Michelle at the time, sought revenge over a past dispute regarding the condo's mortgage. The incident had left him bitter, furious about being forced to pay the mortgage following Michelle's countersuit. Together, Angela and Ian devised a plan to bring Michelle down. Ian provided Michelle's email address to Angela, and they began plotting to frame her and have her arrested. To conceal their scheme, Angela and Ian created separate email addresses to communicate with one another. They also opened 6 fake email accounts in Michelle's name using virtual private networks, VPNs. This explained why Michelle noticed Google alerts about email addresses in her name that she had not created. Unbeknownst to Michelle, Angela was behind these suspicious activities. When Michelle obtained a restraining order, Angela still felt it was insufficient, as she wanted Michelle gone permanently. Angela devised a plan to escalate matters further. She created a fake Craigslist profile in Michelle's name, posting an ad that invited men to engage in a sex act at Michelle's home. However, flaws in the plan led to Ian confessing the truth. Once the truth emerged, police secured a search warrant for Angela's devices. To their astonishment, investigators discovered that everything Ian had claimed was true. A total of 21 threatening emails were uncovered, most sent from Angela and Ian's residence. Further investigation revealed that some emails were sent from Arizona. It was ultimately discovered that Angela had visited her father in Arizona during the same period the emails were sent. After uncovering this shocking evidence, investigators examined Angela's past and found that she had committed similar crimes previously. In 2013, Angela had fabricated a serious illness while dating Jason Rayburn, a California state trooper. She claimed to be an attorney and said she had cervical cancer. However, her story did not add up, and Jason became suspicious. He investigated further and discovered that Angela had lied about having cancer and being a lawyer. This ended their relationship. The deception remained unknown to the public until 2019, nearly 6 years later. On January 6, 2019, Angela was detained and pleaded guilty to 10 felonies, including perjury and false imprisonment. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The Orange County District Attorney's Office quickly cleared Michelle's name of the wrongful charges. 3 days later, Michelle's assault and threatening charges were officially dropped, marking the conclusion of a long and painful ordeal. Although the ordeal had ended, Michelle still bore the scars of her wrongful conviction, including the time she spent in jail. She had to abandon her MBA classes and lost her job after being wrongfully arrested. After the charges were cleared, Michelle's life began to improve. She earned her MBA and obtained a good marketing job at a cosmetics company. She then moved to New York to live with her sister, and her life was better than ever. Ian, on the other hand, separated from Angela and sold their condo for $500,000. However, in 2021, Ian's life took a downturn. He was arrested and charged with planning and executing the plot to frame Michelle, resulting in a 5-year prison sentence and a conviction for perjury. Moving on to the next case. Peter Britton Tobin. On September 29, 2006, at St. Patrick's Church in Glasgow, United Kingdom, detectives discovered the body of a young woman. Little did they realize, this crime was merely the tip of the iceberg. Their investigation soon led them to one of the country's most ruthless serial offenders. Peter Britton Tobin was born on August 27, 1946, in Johnstone, Scotland. He was the youngest of 8 children in the family of Marjorie and Daniel Tobin. From an early age, Peter displayed a difficult character, prompting his parents to send him to a boarding school in 1953, when he was only 7 years old. However, this seemingly produced little effect. Later, he was sent to a correctional institution. Upon completing this period, Peter relocated to Brighton, England. There, he began a relationship with Margaret Mount, a 17-year-old typist who found his personality irresistible. In August 1969, they were married. However, Peter soon revealed his cruel and controlling nature. In addition, he engaged in criminal activities and was convicted and imprisoned for theft and forgery the following year. This led Margaret to divorce him in 1973. That same year, Peter married Sylvia Jeffrey, a local nurse who had also fallen for his charm. That year, they welcomed their first son, Ian. Tragically, their daughter, Claire, died shortly after birth in 1974. Grieving over their lost child and enduring Peter's abusive behavior, Sylvia left in 1976 with their young son. Decades later, when Peter was in his 40s, he pursued a new romance, this time with Kathy Wilson, who was only 16 at the time, vulnerable and impressionable, which made her easy to manipulate. They had a son, Daniel, their only child. They married in 1989 and moved to Scotland. Life proved challenging. Kathy could not go outside freely due to her husband's control over every aspect of her life. His violent behavior persisted and escalated. Consequently, isolation worsened her living conditions. Eventually, the young woman gathered courage and fled with her son in the late 1990s. It remains uncertain whether Kathy's departure triggered the worst aspects of Peter's character to emerge. From that point onward, Peter unleashed a terrible side of himself upon the world, prepared to inflict great harm. Unfortunately, his path crossed with that of a young girl named Vicky Hamilton. Vicky was born in Scotland in 1976. She was the second child of Michael and Janet Hamilton, a married couple who had previously welcomed their firstborn daughter, Sharon. Later, Lindsay joined the family. However, serious disagreements between the parents led to divorce, which was deemed the most appropriate decision. Vicky, Lee, and Lindsay remained in their mother's care and relocated to South London. The eldest daughter, Sharon, stayed in Bathgate, BTHG, but the distance did not prevent Vicky and Sharon from maintaining a close relationship. When Vicky turned 15, Sharon saw it as an opportunity for her sister to take a step toward independence, a desire common to many teenagers. After traveling alone by bus to Scotland for a weekend visit, Vicky was scheduled to return home to her mother's house. This marked her first solo bus journey. Sharon viewed it as a small yet meaningful adventure. On Saturday, February 9, 1991, the sisters went shopping and spent the day in continuous conversation. Sunday was ordinary, except that Vicky felt apprehensive about her return trip. The evening of February 10th was cold and snowy. Vicky made sure she had sufficient money for the fare and reviewed the bus route one last time with her sister before they embraced tightly. Standing at the bus stop, snacking on a bag of chips across from the police station, it was there that Vicky's path fatefully intersected with Peter's. He forcibly dragged her into his car and committed unspeakable acts, raping her before taking her life, either out of malice or to prevent her from reporting him. Peter retained possession of the girl's purse. When Vicky did not arrive at her mother's house and there was no communication from her, her family began a frantic search in desperation. Simultaneously, they alerted the authorities about her disappearance. Once the police launched an investigation, Vicky's face became one of the most recognizable in Scotland. The search operation grew into one of the largest in the country's history. Amid this uproar, Peter chose to relocate to southeast England, specifically Margate, where he settled into a charming house with a garden. There, Peter brought Vicky's lifeless body, wrapped her remains in plastic, and concealed them beneath a layer of concrete. He then covered everything with soil. Neighbors assumed he had dug a sandbox for his young son, who was 3 years old at the time. Peter's name never surfaced during the initial investigation into Vicky's disappearance. The police uncovered no leads regarding her whereabouts and considered her a likely runaway, seeing her as an unhappy teenager due to her parents' divorce. Their theory of voluntary disappearance was reinforced on February 21, 1991, when Vicky's purse was discovered near the main bus station in Edinburgh. Peter, always one step ahead of the authorities, had created this false lead and completely diverted the course of the investigation. Detectives spent 2 fruitless months searching in London. It is known that Vicky's mother died soon after. Over the following decade, Vicky's family and town residents continued to follow the case closely. Yet despite listing over 7,000 names in the file, taking nearly 4,000 statements, and presenting approximately 500 documents alongside 380 potential pieces of physical evidence, all efforts ended in a deadlock. The case was eventually shelved. The next young woman to encounter Peter was Dina McNichol from Essex. She had a brother and 3 sisters. Her father was a jazz musician, and her mother had tragically died years earlier in a car accident. By the age of 18, Dina was known as good-hearted and cheerful, a wonderful friend. She had just completed high school and held great hopes for her future. On one hand, she considered taking a gap year to travel. On the other hand, she aspired to attend university. However, nothing was certain, as although Dina had applied to several institutions of higher education, she had not yet received any responses. During the first weekend of August 1991, Dina attended a music festival in Hampshire. There, she met a young man named David Tremlett. Between dances, they discovered a mutual attraction. On Sunday, August 4th, they spent the night together in a tent. The following day, Dina helped him dismantle the tent, and they agreed to hitchhike back home separately. However, as part of their route was the same, they decided to hitchhike together. Tired but happy, the young couple set out to catch a ride. That was when Peter appeared and offered them a lift. David exited the car first, and Dina wrote down his phone number before saying goodbye. Alone with the unknown driver, Dina was about to face a true nightmare. On that same Monday, August 5th, 1991, Peter repeated the same crime he had committed with Vicky, using Dina's scarf as a gag. After committing the crime, Peter withdrew money from Dina's account at ATMs in Hampshire and Sussex. When her relatives noticed funds being taken from her account, they immediately suspected something was wrong. Her family knew how carefully she had saved every penny and what she intended to use the money for, whether traveling or continuing her education. Days and weeks passed with no word from Dina. The most agonizing part for her family was living in uncertainty. Though unspoken aloud, everyone feared that something terrible had occurred. After all, if Dina were alive, she would have returned home or called to explain her absence. As for Peter, he left Margate without saying goodbye or offering any explanation. Later, in 1993, he settled in Hampshire, specifically in a rented apartment in Leek Park. He claimed that he wanted to be closer to his son. On August 4, 1993, two 14-year-old girls went to visit a local woman, but found she was not home. They decided to ask other neighbors if anyone had seen her. As a result, they knocked on Peter's door. The man saw a unique opportunity and invited them into his home to wait. Seeing that his 5-year-old son was inside, the girls mistook him for a friendly person and agreed to enter. Another version of the story suggests that the meeting was not accidental. The two girls came to Peter's home in response to a babysitting request he had made. They trusted him because upon arrival, they saw his son and stayed to look after him. Everyone agrees that once the child fell asleep, Peter tied them up, threatened them with a knife, and forced them to drink alcohol. He then beat and raped them, injuring one of the girls. Just as they feared their lives would end at the hands of this extremely cruel man, the boy woke up, saving them from suffering the same fatal fate that had befallen Vicky and Dina. In an effort to prevent his son from realizing what had happened and understanding the kind of father he was, Peter decided to leave the apartment with the child. According to some reports, Peter left around 2 a.m., but before doing so he turned on the gas in the kitchen, hoping to complete his monstrous plan. However, the girls regained consciousness and managed to escape. They went to the police and reported all the abuses committed by Peter, whom they described in detail. Peter returned his child to his mother and joined a religious sect called the Communion of Jesus under a false name, hoping to remain unnoticed. Meanwhile, his photograph, provided by police, was published, making his face widely recognized. Due to mass media coverage, information about him began to emerge, and his car was identified thanks to the BBC Crime Watch program. He was located and, after 40 days on the run, captured in Brighton. He appeared in court on May 18, 1994, where he pleaded guilty to sexual assault and indecent acts against two young girls and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. However, Peter did not serve his full sentence and was released in 2014 at the age of 58. Immediately after his release, he returned to Scotland, aiming to relocate away from the area where he was registered as a sex offender. For a time, he managed to remain off the radar. Under a false name and posing as a homeless man, he knocked on the door of St. Patrick's Church in Glasgow. To avoid detection, he adopted the name Peter McLaughlin. Dennis and Katie Curran, a married couple from the church's charitable group, recall that evening vividly when a homeless man sought shelter. Despite his vulnerable appearance, Katie felt uneasy about him. Peter, raised as a Catholic, soon felt comfortable in the church. His apparent begging served as an effective disguise, arousing sympathy from parishioners while attracting little attention. Consequently, he roamed freely around the church, an ideal hiding place for him. However, his predatory instincts remained intact. Being in a sacred place held no significance for him. Calculating every move meticulously, Peter displayed eagerness to assist in church repairs. After approximately 6 or 7 weeks, he asked the priest if he could join the maintenance staff. At that time, people facing financial difficulties often sought refuge in churches. It was under such circumstances that Angelica Clark crossed paths with Peter. Angelica was a 23-year-old woman from Poland who had come to Scotland during the summer of 2006. She intended to spend her summer break working to earn money and fund her language studies back home. She lived at the parish house of St. Patrick's Church, where she also worked as a cleaner. Peter immediately took a liking to her and somehow convinced her to help him with various tasks occasionally. On Sunday, September 24, 2006, Angelica spent several hours assisting him in painting a shed. Some parishioners noticed them together before Peter attacked her at the back of the chapel. Leica Brown, 47, and her husband Andrew, 46, who lived in a multi-story house overlooking the church, heard a woman scream through their open windows. In her statement afterward, Leica described it as a brief scream that sounded like someone being forcibly restrained. It was so eerie that it compelled her to get up from the couch and approach the window, but she saw nothing. The scream heard by the Browns coincided with the moment Peter caught the young woman off guard as she stood with her back to him. He struck her forcefully and dragged her to the back of the chapel, where he continued to beat her. After she lost consciousness, he raped her and inflicted several knife wounds. He then hid the body in the basement under the floor near the confessional. At this point, Angelica was still alive. Several hours passed, and parishioners began to notice that the young woman was missing. That is when Dennis informed his wife, Katie, about Angelica's unusual disappearance. The police quickly initiated an investigation and began interviewing members of the community one by one. During these interviews, it came to light that Peter was the last person seen with Angelica, albeit disguised as Pete, a homeless laborer. Eventually, he became the prime suspect. Officers went to question him, but found no evidence linking him directly to Angelica's disappearance, so the investigation continued. Aware it was only a matter of time before the body was discovered and traced back to him, Peter fled to London. By this time, Detective David Swindle had joined the investigation and began to suspect that this case was not merely a disappearance. Based on their findings and collected testimonies, Detective Swindle believed it was unlikely that Angelica would be found alive. Finally, on September 29, 2006, authorities discovered her body in the chapel. This news shocked British society due to both the nature of the crime and the location chosen by the perpetrator to hide the body. Examining the girl's injuries led Detective David to suspect that this was not Peter's first crime. However, he did not yet realize how horrific and dangerous this individual truly was. Further revelations were inevitable. DNA found at the crime scene and on Angelica matched data in the United Kingdom's National Criminal Intelligence Database. That was when they learned exactly who they were dealing with. A man whose actions indicated deep-seated brutality and criminal sophistication. The individual they were seeking turned out to be Peter Tobin, whose fingerprints had been discovered at the crime scene. Consequently, the first step for the authorities was to publish his photograph in the media. His image was distributed nationwide, and the Scottish police reached out to the Metropolitan Police, initiating a search across the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, in London, Peter attempted to conceal himself by going to a hospital and pretending to have heart problems. He claimed he experienced chest pain and weakness on the left side of his body. Identifying himself as a plumber named James Kelly, he was examined by Dr. Nick Lasso. However, something about his demeanor and behavior raised concerns for the doctor. Initially avoiding eye contact, a behavior atypical of most patients, Peter aroused suspicion when tests failed to reveal any clear physical cause for his alleged pain. The doctor's suspicions were confirmed by a nurse who recognized Peter from a photograph that had been circulating in the media. As a result, both the nurse and doctor contacted the police. This phone call significantly altered the course of the investigation. On September 30th, police officer Alan Murray was dispatched to the hospital in London. Peter was taken into a room so Alan could speak with him. Immediately following this encounter, Peter was arrested. Although initially charged only with violating the sex offender registry, this approach allowed officers time to build a criminal case against him. Under Detective David's leadership, evidence gathered led to Peter's trial for crimes against Angelica in late March 2007. Despite substantial evidence against him, Peter denied committing violent acts against her, claiming instead that they had engaged in consensual sexual activity. He also denied providing false information to police and hospital staff. After 6 weeks of legal proceedings, characterized by lies and manipulations on Peter's part, the truth finally prevailed. He was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 21 years. Detective David and his team were convinced that there was more to Peter's story. While the trial was ongoing, detectives delved into Peter's life, gathering additional evidence and compiling a dossier. This work involved various law enforcement agencies across the country. To avoid harming or interfering with Angelica's case, they chose to conduct their work confidentially. The joint police operation was known as Anagram. Part of their work involved connecting missing persons cases to locations where Peter had been. During these investigations, they established 2 precise links, one in Bathgate and another in Margate. Several weeks later, A search was conducted at Peter's old house on the coast, where investigators found a knife with DNA samples hidden in the attic. However, nothing else of significance was discovered there. They then went to the house where Peter had lived in Margate. It soon became clear that they were dealing with a serious criminal offender. Investigators dug up a sandbox in the garden, one that Peter had made for his son, and shockingly, they found a female body there. But that was not all. Continuing their search at the same location, they discovered another body. A woman's handbag was also found at the scene, which the team preserved for DNA analysis. Forensic experts worked diligently to establish the identities of the two victims, determine their ages, and estimate their dates of death. They also analyzed the genetic traces from the handbag. These DNA traces were very strong, but initially yielded no matches in the National DNA Database. However, on June 1, 2007, a crucial breakthrough occurred. The DNA matched Peter's fingerprint. This development proved monumental for investigators, who deemed it necessary to proceed decisively in this direction by November. On August 14, 2007, authorities confirmed that one of the bodies found belonged to Vicky Hamilton, who had disappeared at the age of 15 during her first independent trip. Her family had been waiting for answers for 16 years. Later, it was announced that the second body belonged to 18-year-old Dinah McNichol, who had been hitchhiking home after attending a concert. On September 1, 2008, the Royal Prosecution Service contacted Peter's lawyers and charged him with the murder of Vicky, leading to his trial. Officers had to restrain Vicky's father, Michael, after he saw Peter face to face. Michael later admitted that he simply wanted Peter to know he was there to defend his daughter's name and protect her memory. After a month-long trial, on December 2, 2008, Peter was found guilty of Vicky's murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. The trial for Dinah took place in December 2009. On December 16, after the defense failed to provide evidence exonerating their client, the jury found Peter guilty of Dinah's murder. He subsequently received his third life sentence. On November 22, 2007, it was reported that Tobin had been attacked by fellow inmates, sustaining minor injuries. Shortly before this incident, the serial killer had confessed to a total of 11 murders. Recently, on October 8, 2022, Peter passed away in the hospital. Moving on to the next case. The case of Sierra Breland. The disappearance of 31-year-old Sierra Breland, an Indiana lawyer from Cleveland, Georgia, remains a mystery. The last time she was seen was on February 24, 2022, at 7:17 p.m., when a surveillance camera captured her outside her mother-in-law's home in Johns Creek. Despite extensive efforts by the police and her family, Sierra's whereabouts and what happened to her remain unknown. According to her mother Kelly, Sierra was a cheerful and ambitious woman. She was determined to be taken seriously, so she worked hard to become a lawyer, following in her mother's footsteps as a paralegal. Growing up in Georgia, Sierra dreamed of living in Atlanta one day. To achieve this goal, she attended the University of Tennessee for college and then Florida State University for law school. Kelly said Sierra was happy, energetic, loving, and extremely driven in her career. In October 2020, Sierra met Xavier Breland on Tinder, and their relationship quickly developed. 6 months later, the couple married, and Sierra became pregnant. According to court records, Sierra provided legal assistance to Xavier in his dispute with his ex-wife. The newlyweds decided to start a new life in Carmel, Indiana, where Sierra got a job at a law firm. In 2021, she gave birth to a son named Jackson. Xavier and Sierra appeared to be a perfect couple from the outside, but their relationship was plagued by issues from the early stages. According to Shelby Campbell, Sierra's cousin, problems between them surfaced shortly after their initial dates. Sierra had told Xavier she wanted no further contact, but he refused to accept rejection. Instead, he began showing up uninvited at her apartment, sitting outside her door. He also sent her threatening messages after seeing her with another man. Sierra warned him she would involve the authorities if he persisted. Despite this, she eventually gave him another chance, and 6 months later they got married. Shelby and Sierra were inseparable, exchanging daily texts. Sierra confided in her, revealing her fears about her husband. In one message, she wrote, "I'm really struggling to cope with this. I don't want to give up on someone I love and abandon our family, but his behavior is getting worse, not better. It makes me wonder what the future holds." He used to feel guilty when he said hurtful things, but lately he doesn't even apologize. He blames me, saying I did this because you made me. Sierra feared that if something happened to her, her husband would be to blame. Shelby claims that she frequently advised Sierra to leave her husband, but Sierra understood the importance of planning her exit carefully. The text messages only provide a glimpse into the situation between Sierra and her husband. Sierra did call the police on multiple occasions, and law enforcement responded to her residences in both Georgia and Indiana multiple times. According to Campbell, by the time the police arrived, Sierra would have calmed down enough to cover for her husband, denying any abuse. Shelby revealed that an investigator even contacted Sierra's mother after one of these incidents, telling her that he knew Sierra was lying about the abuse when she called 911. The investigator had seen this pattern before and was worried that something terrible might happen to Sierra. Sierra was determined to leave her husband Xavier and had been secretly building up a bank account to prepare for her independence. Despite sending messages to Xavier claiming she loved him, she had concluded that she could not afford to stay in the troubled relationship. Aware of her daughter's difficulties, Sierra's parents, Kelly and Nick, encouraged her to break free from Xavier and promised her a safe haven back at home if she needed it. Sierra's decisive trip to Georgia began when she and Xavier packed up their baby and large dog into a 2017 white Volkswagen Tiguan for the 11-hour drive south. According to her family, she arrived at her parents' house on February 19th, where she spent the night reconnecting with relatives she had not seen since moving to Indiana. Although it appeared to be a brief visit, Sierra had decided not to return to Indiana, marking a new chapter in her life. Xavier was interested in this trip because his mother lived in Georgia, just like Sierra's mother. However, Xavier did not know that Sierra did not plan to return to Indiana. Sierra had told her mother that she was going to find a job in Georgia and that she was getting a divorce due to her husband's increasingly abusive behavior. On Saturday, February 19th, Sierra arrived at her parents' house in Cleveland, Georgia, where she spent the night. She reassured them that she wanted a divorce and would not return to Indiana. On Sunday, February 20th, Sierra left her parents' house to pick up her son, Jackson, from her mother-in-law's house in Johns Creek, Georgia, about an hour away. Before leaving, Sierra sent a text to her cousin, Shelby Campbell, saying, "I'm at Xavier's mom's house. He won't give me Jackson, so I'm waiting to get him so I can leave." On Monday, February 21st, at 11:17 p.m., she sent a text to her father, Nick, saying, "I'll be back in the morning if that's okay." Nick responded the next day, telling her it was okay and that she did not have to ask. When Nick did not hear back from Sierra, he reached out to her again. She replied that everything was fine and that she had been feeling a bit sick. Nick contacted her again on Wednesday to ask if she was feeling better, but he did not receive a response. He sent another text on Thursday, February 24th, but there was still no response. By Friday, Sierra's loved ones were growing concerned because she had not replied, which was out of character for her. On the evening of Saturday, February 26th, Nick received a call from an unknown number based in Indiana. Initially, Nick did not panic, assuming Sierra was still in Georgia, so he answered the call. The caller claimed to be a police officer and broke the news that Sierra had been reported missing. Apparently, her husband, Xavier, had filed a missing persons report. This revelation left the family in shock, as they had been under the impression that Sierra was still in Georgia despite her uncharacteristic silence. What is especially puzzling, according to Shelby Campbell, is that Xavier never reached out to anyone to check on Sierra's whereabouts. He did not call or notify anyone, which made the situation even more baffling. After speaking with the Carmel police, Xeria's father decided to call Xavier. In their conversation, Xeria's father pressured Xavier to tell the truth, reminding him that Xeria had warned her family that Xavier would be responsible if anything happened to her. Xavier responded by telling him to go to hell, and then hung up the phone. After Nick called Xavier's father, who lived next to Sierra and Xavier in Carmel, the father claimed he had never seen her. This was confirmed by a press release from the Carmel Police Department in Indiana on March 2nd. Xavier Breland had earlier reported Sierra missing to the police department on Saturday, February 26, 2022. During their investigation, detectives discovered a video recording that showed Sierra's last known location, her mother-in-law's house in Georgia, on February 24th at 7:07 p.m. According to the Carmel Police Department's official report, nothing unusual happened in the video. On February 25th, Sierra left her home in the Brookstone Park subdivision in Carmel, Indiana, around 1 p.m. to walk to a nearby store. At the time, she was wearing a black top and purple shorts, and the temperature was around 20 degrees. However, police reported that she never arrived at the store, and there was no surveillance video showing her entering the store. Sierra's family became concerned when she vanished, leaving behind 3 phones, identification, and credit cards. They knew she would never leave without informing them, especially not her 5-month-old son. Her mother, Kelly, revealed that Sierra had confided in her about financial struggles and alleged abuse from her husband, who used their child to control her. Kelly was adamant that Sierra would not abandon her son, believing that she would rather be dead than do so. On February 28, 2022, 2 days after reporting his wife, Sierra, missing, Xavier received an unexpected visit from the police at his doorstep. According to court documents, there was an accidental discharge of a firearm at a residence on Baldwin Lane. Xavier claimed that he had been moving a Christmas tree in the garage when he heard the gunshot, prompting him to run outside. He then returned to the garage, found the gun, and unloaded it before calling the police to report the incident himself. The investigation revealed that there were 2 guns in his house. However, the police did not disclose whether they found any evidence linking Xavier to Sierra's disappearance. Nevertheless, it soon emerged that Xavier had a criminal history, having been convicted of felony burglary charges in 2005. It was also suspicious that Xavier waited an entire day to report his wife missing, claiming she had not returned home from a trip to the store. A few days after the police received the missing person report, Xavier was identified as a person of interest in his wife's disappearance. He was arrested on an unrelated charge due to an outstanding warrant for aggravated stalking in Core County and was extradited to Georgia to face those charges. Court records show that Xavier had previously placed a tracking device inside a stuffed animal belonging to his daughter to track her mother, his ex-wife, as part of a custody dispute between the former couple. On Friday, 2 weeks after Sierra's disappearance, a search operation was conducted in several neighborhoods in Johns Creek, involving police, volunteers, family, and friends. The main areas of focus were 2 neighborhoods along Medlock Bridge Road, which police believed Sierra might have passed through during her stay in Georgia. The search efforts included distributing flyers and setting up electronic signs at 2 locations along Kimball Bridge Road, seeking the public's assistance. The Johns Creek Police Department also contacted several commercial electronic sign companies to display Sierra's photo and information across Metro Atlanta. The family requested that anyone who saw a Volkswagen Tiguan with Georgia license plate 51,869 renminbi, which had a university law school frame around the plate, contact the police. The vehicle was searched for evidence by forensic investigators and subsequently released. As Sierra was last seen at her mother-in-law's house in Georgia, police suspected that her disappearance might be linked to something that occurred at this location. Police traced the road Xavier took back to Indiana, but were unable to confirm whether Sierra was in the car. Notably, Xavier was the only person who exited the white Volkswagen at gas stations and shops. The level of cooperation from Xavier's mother during the investigation remains unclear, but law enforcement officials confirmed that evidence was collected from the residence through a search warrant as part of their investigation. Johns Creek investigators, including forensic experts and cadaver dogs, searched the area for signs of a struggle or clues to the couple's disappearance. Despite the involvement of a canine unit, no scent trail was found, and the gathered evidence remains undisclosed due to the ongoing investigation. Xavier Breland was arrested in Georgia on March 16, 2022, for aggravated stalking. This stemmed from a 2021 incident in which he hid a tracking device to stalk the mother of his child, who had a restraining order against him. He was later found not guilty, but was arrested again and extradited to Indiana for unlawful possession of a firearm. Xavier Breland asked a judge to lower his bond to an amount his mother could afford. The court initially set it at $35,000, but prosecutors requested $50,000. After Breland appealed, the judge set it at $100,000. He was released in February 2023 after posting bail. Sierra's disappearance remains a mystery despite extensive searches. She was last seen at a store, and investigations have identified several potential locations. The vast search area spans millions of acres of state and federal land, parks, and undeveloped areas in Georgia, plus thousands of acres of railroad and utility easements. According to Kelly Breland, law enforcement has gathered evidence and statements from multiple states, but these are like puzzle pieces without a complete picture. Some items were removed from Xavier's mother's home, as revealed in court documents related to a civil case filed by Xavier's mother against Xavier's sister. As part of their search, crime scene investigators cut and removed the carpet and mattress from Xavier's mother's home. On April 21, 2022, according to documents from the familial civil dispute, after Xavier Breland's arrest on March 1st, 5-month-old Jackson was placed into state care. Since then, Jackson's grandparents, Nick and Kelly Miller, have been able to spend time with the infant and are working to bring the baby back home to Georgia. Over the past year, numerous searches have focused on specific areas, but no leads have emerged regarding the new mom's disappearance. Police have reconstructed events, distributed flyers, and used electronic signs to raise awareness. Sierra, 5 feet 7 inches tall, 120 pounds, with blonde hair and distinct tattoos, was last seen in a white 2017 VW Tiguan with Georgia plate 5,869 renminbi. Anyone who saw her in February is urged to contact authorities. Xavier is the only person of interest that police have publicly named in connection with Sierra's disappearance, but so far, no charges have been filed against him. Despite this, Sierra's family remains convinced that Xavier knows what happened to her and is the only one who can provide the answers needed to bring closure and allow Sierra to rest in peace. Kelly Breland, a family member, believes that Sierra's body might be located in one of 4 states: Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, or Indiana. She is appealing to outdoorsmen and fishermen in these states to be vigilant and report any information they might have to the authorities. In a separate development, Sierra's parents have been granted custody of the couple's child. It is worth noting that Xavier Breland was previously arrested and released on bail for illegal possession of firearms. His trial was set to take place on December 28, 2023, but he failed to appear in court, and his current whereabouts are unknown. As a result, a rearrest warrant has been issued, and law enforcement is working to track him down. This recent development adds another layer of complexity to the already puzzling case of Sierra's disappearance. Xavier Breland, a 6'1", 160-pound black man with brown hair and green eyes, has gone missing. There is a warrant out for his arrest, and the FBI has joined the search for the missing woman, Sierra, whose body has not been found. The disappearances of both Xavier and Sierra have raised many unanswered questions. Sierra's mother, Kelly Breland, believes her daughter was afraid of Xavier and did not plan to return to Indiana with him. With both individuals now missing, the case has become even more urgent. The trial related to Xavier's gun charge has been postponed multiple times. Law enforcement and Sierra's family are now seeking the public's help in finding Xavier and Sierra, hoping to shed light on the mysterious circumstances surrounding their disappearances. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.